All right, hey, good evening again. This is another episode of Guyana's Hockey History, and tonight we have the honor of speaking with the great George Powdar, former national captain, national coach. Um, George, welcome. And the way I usually do this is ask people to give us start off just talking about their hockey life, how it started, like sports life actually, because most people did something else before hockey, and the process of going from these other sports to hockey and then continue from there, and we just have a regular conversation. As things come up, I'll ask you questions and
Sure.
get some more detail. All right. So welcome
Okay.
again, and over to you. Let's tell how did you get started in the sport? What sports did you play? What level? Stuff like that.
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Jeremy. I'm sure you probably know a little bit or heard a little bit of this information before. But basically, I attended centralized school. And, I obviously grew up on the east coast of them, a place called Pleasance, a village called Pleasance, and went to school in Georgetown, as mentioned, centralized school. And at Central, played all sports. I mean, played obviously football, played cricket, played tennis, played uh, basketball, some of the other sports that were available at the time. And I really got a knack for football and cricket. I mean, I was a pretty good football player. As you probably know or may have heard before, I actually, at the age of 16, made the guy on the 19 national team. At the time, August Wuta was our coach, and played many games against Suriname at the under 19 level. Also, cricket was a fairly good cricketer. Central High School had a very good cricket team, and represented Central High School not only the White Cup but the second division, as well as I also basically went to trials for cricket, the Guyana under 19 cricket team as well. So I was basically known as or considered one of the up and coming young multi-sport athlete. Left Central in 1970 and joined GSC primarily to play cricket. At the time, GSC had a fairly good cricket team. I was a middle order batsman as well as a wicketkeeper, and GSC had recruited me to play cricket for them. And so I started, playing cricket at GSC. At the time, I was also playing football, but GSC didn't have much of a football team. And you may know or may recall Stanley Fangafat, who was the GSC women's hockey coach at the time. We were fairly good friends. Stanley had gone to Central, and he basically was after me to come join the hockey team. And at the time, GSC was trying to form a men's hockey team, and so that's basically where I got started in hockey. Utilize my sports knowledge, my cricket skills, my soccer skills, and found it fairly easy to learn hockey.
Mm.
So in a very short time, I was considered to be one of the up and coming, promising hockey players. So
Mm.
that's basically how I got started, and I obviously got a liking for hockey, and really committed to the game. So at the time, I basically stopped playing cricket for GSC because they were conflicting with, other sports. And so I basically committed myself to hockey. And then obviously I was playing, football as well for a long period of time. So
Okay,
that's kind of background.
right, so like what like for you if you remember at the time, well, you had these options, right? You could play
Yeah.
cricket, you could play football. What made you do like go into the hockey direction, if you could remember that?
Well, for the most part, due to encouragement from others, I mean, including, again, as I mentioned, Stanley, he felt that, I had a lot of potential in hockey, and I picked up the game fairly easy, as mentioned before. And so I saw that hockey had a lot of potential. And then shortly after, started playing, I mean, basically within 2 years, I was basically able to, or selected to make a Guyana team. Actually, my first game was against a team from Germany who was visiting Guyana at the time, the Düsseldorf Hockey Club. I remember those games well because that was back shortly after the Guyana had participated in the Pan Am Games. So, hockey was obviously, up in front and center of the sports world in Guyana. And so I was selected to represent, Guyana in that tournament. In that basically was a 2-game tournament, and I did fairly well. And so I really, felt that I had an opportunity here, not only to make the Guyana team,
Mhm.
but also Guyana was going to host the Caribbean Championships in '72.
Right.
And so there was lots of opportunities there. And so that was really one of the main reasons that I committed to hockey,
Right.
knowing that I had opportunities here to make a national team and, obviously continue a sport that I was really enjoying at the time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So basically, is it? It's pretty amazing to think of that. Your first time you pick up a hockey stick essentially is 1970, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're making a national team in 1972, right?
True, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's amazing. I always say that I think that this sport is one of the hardest sports to pick up as an adult because it's
Mm-hmm.
you while you might understand positioning because of soccer and stuff like that, it helps.
Yeah.
Actual things you have to do with a stick and a ball, you
Mm-hmm.
sit in a different position. You have to run bent over and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You have to stay to the right side, and there's a lot of different weirdnesses there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
pretty amazing. So like along the way, you while you if you're making the national team for in '72, like what's happening with your club at the time, club hockey for you in the GSC?
Well, yeah, I mean, GSC had actually started playing club hockey at the time, so we had a hockey team, and obviously, I was really enjoying it. So, I mean, basically, it's every day we were playing hockey, and there was no. I mean, Sani was kind of the coach at the time, as
Right,
well as R.B. Bishop. He was an attorney and that was a member of GSC, and so he would assist, and so I got tips from Stanley from some of the other players in terms of what the rules of the game and how I should adapt.
right.
And then after I started playing for obviously for the national team, I mean Chris Fernandez and Skip Roberts, your dad, Skip, they were very instrumental in basically providing guidance, coaching, basically telling me what to do or how to again gain experience in the game. And so by '72, when I started playing for the national team, I mean obviously the exposure was there, so I was getting a lot of exposure playing with obviously the top players in the country.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was actually one of the things I remember well is during the Caribbean Championships, there were four teams, Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. And it was actually Guyana won that tournament. And
Right,
fortunately or unfortunately for me, I was awarded the outstanding player. I mean, I was a sweeper back.
right,
So I was pretty fast because, I mean, I had speed having run track as well. So I was really fast, had a mindset of football because again, the position play and so on was there. So to me, it was very easy to adopt, being a defensive player. I
right.
played people back. I recall Chris was basically was a center back in front of me, and then Skip was also playing. Well, he was a midfield, but was for the most part was a defensive midfield. So
Right.
he and Chris were in front of me. I remember Duncan Joseph was on the right side, Frankie Chin was on the left side. So we
Yeah.
had a fairly good, defensive team, if you will.
Right, right.
We also had, players like, Dennis Fong and, Trevor Chang. We had Company Souza. So, Simeon Andrews. I mean, those are some of the names that you may know.
Yeah, definitely.
Guyana was again considered at the time one of the top, countries within the Caribbean.
Yeah, definitely. There's one of the things I want to ask you about is we go from at 72. I know we've been there from 72 to about I would say 75.
Mm.
Guyana would be considered one of the best of those
Yes.
four big teams, right? And
Yeah.
then after 1975, we like I don't think, and you could remember, maybe you
Mm.
remember, I don't think we had a non-national team till 1980. And
Mm-hmm. Mm.
as something happened, so in those 5 years, we went from being one of the best to not probably being the worst of the four, I would think,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When that Barbados team came to Guyana in 1980,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, watching what they're doing, like as a young player just made national team for the first time, like what they're doing was amazing to me, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't know
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had progressed so far ahead of us. So like, what do you think contributed to that, like in that period of time, like how to go from
Yeah, a couple of things, Jeremy. A couple of things. I mean, we actually were considered, one of the top teams, 72, 73, 74. And therefore, we had actually very high hopes. So we also participated in the 75 Pan Am Games in Mexico.
right?
And to me, that was the highest level that, we had obviously seen and
Us, right?
participated in because you had teams like Argentina and who was considered one of the top, not only in South America, was one of the top, teams in the world. I mean, they were playing in the Olympics and so on.
Right.
We also had Canada, and so we had, some very good teams. Unfortunately for us, we didn't have really, a good coach. So we weren't exposed to the most modern style, the most modern techniques in hockey. So even though we were doing fairly well in the Caribbean, I know, again, we were certainly one of the top teams. When we got to the Pan Am Games, we really realized that, we were basically out of our league. I mean, we lost, I think, almost, if not all the games, we probably just drew one, but we lost most of our games. And one of the factors in that tournament, besides the high altitude, again, not having a seasoned, experienced coach, we were basically at a loss. I mean, we were very reactive. We were basically now learning. And even though our results got better as we played in the tournament, we didn't do very well. At the time, you obviously, Chris, Skip and others realized that, for Guyana to really take the next level, we had to get youngsters involved. So we had to bring in youngsters. And so at that point in time, just before the Pan Am Games, I was appointed a national coach for the National Sports Council. Mm-hmm. I used to work with the Ministry of Agriculture while I was learning or playing hockey. But then early in 75, with the focus on sports and so on in Guyana, the National Sports Council, I was appointed in Sports Council coach. So it became my passion to develop hockey in Guyana. And that's when, we started basically a youth program. You may recall because you were part of it, where we had, not only Old Fort, but you had Park Rovers, we had a lot of young teams, and really started to focus on developing hockey. So the focus on basically playing for the national team at that point basically stopped. And then again, shift the focus to coaching and really started encouraging or finding young players to play.
Yeah, okay. And so I guess I remember like early days when, I used to be watching go scale. There were a lot of like you started with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dusseldorf coming to Guyana, Canada coming to Guyana. I think even USA, would come to Guyana. There were teams coming to Guyana to play. And then from 1975 to 1980, it's like zero, right? So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I think a lot of that. I think that's around the time that they decided that you got to play on artificial turf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, hurts us a lot when nobody's playing Guyana anymore. But that can't even be their full answer because I don't think a whole lot of countries had turf at that time anymore.
No. Mm-hmm.
So that by itself couldn't be the answer. But teams stopped coming to Guyana essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think teams were going. I know teams were going to Barbados for sure.
Yes.
Exposure. And I know that made a difference for us. But I know that we always had hockey talent. And it was something like I think the coaching is the thing that you say was missing for us. And that would definitely have made a difference. But also I think the exposure to teams, right?
Yeah.
Even without a coach, we learned a lot from when Barbados came in. But I think having the international exposure made a huge difference. So like when as a national, so like as a player, you're doing two things, right? So you're a player and you're rising up, and by 1980, of course, you're the captain of the national, and you also before that, you're the coach. You're like basically responsible for like developing hockey in Guyana. Essentially, that's your full-time job, right? So obviously, this is taking you. It's Guyana, not Georgetown. So you got to be over doing all this stuff. Like, what was it like? Like, you have to be. How much time will you spend in Georgia? How much time you spend in Linden? How much time you spend in Lenore? What was it like doing that kind of job?
Yeah.
I don't think it's one. I don't think we have that job anymore in Guyana. So it'll be unique for people to hear that this was actually happening back in the day.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, again, at the time, Jeremy, there was a National Sports Council. Derek Whitehead was the national secretary. He was the sports secretary, and Derek Whitehead being, basically a hockey, a person. And then obviously he was good, very good friends with Skip and Chris and so on. So a lot of focus was really, placed on the development of hockey. So even though after the Pan Am Games, I mean, I was also being the sports of the National Sports Council. Derek Whitehouse was the coach of the national team. And quite clearly, he drafted me to be his assistant for the women's hockey team. And there was a tournament in 1976. So I basically spent a lot of time during the middle of 76 assisting Derek with the Guyana women's national team. In that tournament, again, Guyana played fairly well. I mean, I think we held our own. Well, obviously we didn't win the tournament, but really held our own. So the focus on hockey there was not only on the men's side, was also placed on the women's side.
Right.
And as well as, and you may recall this, I mean, back then, we had a lot of teams. I mean, in my last count, at that time we had roughly 10 teams that's playing hockey. So we had quite a few folks. We had teams like, in addition to GFC, GCC, GSC, we had like police force, GDF, obviously we had, Old Fort. We had teams from Linden, playing hockey as well. So we had quite a lot of teams playing hockey at the time. And so even though we did not participate in a lot of the international tournaments, hockey itself, the development of hockey itself, had progressed. Back in 76, we also started indoor hockey, right? And so we had our first indoor tournament at the National Sports Hall.
Yeah, so those yeah, those when me, you and that, we were rivals at that point. GSC,
Oh,
right?
yes.
That was a big rivalry at the time, right? Because I think
Yes.
right, we played the first one in 77. We were just little boys at the time, but like in
Oh, yeah.
78 we won it, then 79 we lose the final, 78. So them 3 years we playing for GSC's the final all the time,
Yeah.
right? Every time. So yeah, that was a big deal right back then. For sure.
It was. I mean, and obviously, I'm sure you recall this very well. I mean, to me, All Ford, in addition to having a good team of youngsters, but you guys really, developed very quickly, right? And obviously with coaching from your dad, Skip and others, whoever else were coaching you guys, within the short time, you guys were basically became a force of hockey in Guyana.
Yeah, definitely. For indoor at least.
Yeah, well.
We're too squally to play outdoor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But
So in 76, right? This is the thing I always, when I tell people about you and what you did with Cuba, is like I would say George went to start Cuba hockey program, right?
Yeah.
Now, but I know that's overstating the case a little bit, or whether it was actually that. Like, what was it? What was Cuba like? What were you doing there?
I mean, that was basically, I would say, a lifetime experience for me, because at the time, sports in Cuba was a big thing. I mean, Cuba committed, dedicated them, the country was sports. That's how they basically had their international recognition. And Guyana had obviously at that time very good boxing teams, and Cuba was obviously the top in the region for boxing. And so Guyana and Cuba developed a coaching exchange program where Cuba sent one of their boxing coaches to Guyana, and they were now starting hockey as well. And therefore, they decided to send me to Cuba for 6 months.
Okay.
And so when I got to Cuba, again, I mean, they were playing hockey, but, no learning basically. But they had committed to developing hockey within the country. And so for the 6 months I was there, I mean, again, had the opportunity here to tour all of Cuba. But really, I mean, it was, morning, noon, and night that I was coaching, Cuban hockey players.
Yeah, so what was that like? Like, what was the day-to-day like in Cuba? You wake up in the morning, breakfast, and then they take you to a school. Is it schools?
Well, yes, they had schools, they had clubs. And again, it was basically 3 sessions a day, right? In the morning, I would spend time with, the youngsters. In the afternoon, I would spend time with what I call intermediate players, the club teams. And then at night, I would spend time with the national teams or what they call the provincial teams. In other words, they had interprovincial competition. And so I would spend time with each of the teams and along with the coaches that each of the team coaches. And those sessions were 2 hours, 3 hours long. So it was basically, living and breathing hockey all the time.
Yeah.
And they really, I mean, they were really, well, Cuba, as I mentioned before, they were very serious about their sports. And so to me, it was basically a new experience to see how much they were committed to sports. So it was not a surprise, Jeremy, and you may recall this, a year after they brought a team to Guyana and they played fairly well.
Yeah.
And just within that year that, since leaving them, leaving Cuba, basically the end of, in early 77, Cuba came to Guyana probably a couple of months later and really held their own against us.
Yeah, well, okay, so it was under 19 team, but I had to question some of them guys' age because
yes.
a man tell us he just come back from fighting 2 years in Angola. I'm like, Well, I don't think so.
Yeah.
19, I don't think you went there at 17, but you never know, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
you never know. And I mean, I didn't focus on the age per se at the time because
okay.
yeah, I mean they brought some big players that I thought were clearly over age.
Yeah, well,
But
it's all
the
right.
goal was to play against on the 19 team because as you recall back then, they focused on was developing our younger players.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Right.
it didn't really matter, right? It's not like it's a
Yeah.
competition and they cheated, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's development and we get development from this. So,
Right.
no
Yeah.
problem. But yeah, yeah. I mean, and clearly, at that point, it was obvious that that process from 76 to 77, it is legitimate for you to claim that you had a big impact on their program, right? And
Oh
that,
yeah.
for the
Definitely.
beginning, for sure. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something. And I think one of the reasons why I do this thing is to like highlight stuff like that where very few people know that you did that. Or Guyana, right? We claim you as
Yeah.
had this impact on Cuba's hockey program.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely a good thing. So like in terms of like so the coaching thing at that point was um, you made that impact as a coach. You're now like looking at 1980. You captain the national team.
Mm-hmm.
When you come back from Cuba, like, are you looking at like saying, well, I see what Cuba's doing. Should Guyana be doing some of this? And were you trying to make that happen
Yes.
to the extent that you have any impact on that? Because
Yeah.
what it is a national investment,
Mm-hmm.
and you can influence that in Guyana necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time that yes, the short answer is yes, Jeremy. I mean, I looked at the way the Cubans have structured their program. And I mean, at the time back in Guyana, hockey was basically being played in Georgetown and in Linden. I mean, Georgetown was obviously the epicenter of hockey. Most of the clubs were there. All of these big players were there. But what I learned from Cuba was that, in order for us to expand hockey, you have to get, the other areas involved. So I had started a hockey program. I used to go up to Berbice and to the East Coast, West Coast. Actually, at one point, we had a team that we started in Lenora, which is on the West Bank. And before that, they had good cricketers and so on. I mean, and they were teaching hockey. Did the same thing in Berbice, went on the West Bank. So the goal back then was to expand the game beyond just the Guyana. The one problem that Guyana had, obviously, we didn't have the resources to provide hockey sticks to all of these different teams. So what was happening, I had basically, a bag of hockey sticks, probably, 30 or so hockey sticks that I used to take around with me, right?
Yeah,
Just to make sure that the people I'm coaching, had hockey sticks to play.
yeah,
And we didn't have the opportunity here to leave the sticks with them. So, I would go there for a week and people pick up the game and learn it and so on. But then when I leave, it'd be another month or so before I go back there. And so there was not the continuation of the game within those areas. And that was really one of the big disadvantages we had. Guyana didn't have the resources, or the National Sports Council didn't
right.
have the resources to buy hockey sticks for everyone.
Yeah, so
Right.
that was be a drawback for the sport, I guess, is everybody got to have their own sticks.
But yeah, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, whereby in Cuba, I mean, they had that resource, and everybody had hockey sticks. They own 2 and 3 hockey sticks, so they didn't have that challenge. So
Right,
that was one of the bigger hurdles that we had at the time. But I mean, I was very proud of the progress that we were making at that point in time. I
yeah,
mean, besides the coaching and getting folks in these different areas, as mentioned before, we had not only did we had fourth division hockey in Georgetown, but you may recall yes, second division hockey as well, where Saints and Old Fort and those teams, Old Park Rovers, were basically the up and coming teams.
right.
And so I felt that in terms of the development of hockey, we were making lots of progress.
Yeah, definitely. I think like, but basically from you left Guyana late 1982.
Mm,
So basically, I think that's really a big part of what happens for Guyana. Like you mentioned, like 1975, you have a national team. By 1980, it's only you and Peter from that team that are on 1980
yeah,
team. So you lose a lot of continuity,
right, yeah.
knowledge of experience that bring to the national team.
Mm-hmm.
I think that migration obviously was a big thing for us. You know what I mean? So,
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
so many people leave, and I think like that makes a difference now. Where in Guyana today, I see a lot of that process. A lot of people who played. There isn't the same level, I don't think, of at least
Mm.
hockey people still
Sure.
stay in Guyana, and they still, still. And then, like, what happens as you get older in the sport and you don't play the sport anymore, you
Mm.
become coach, right? So
Right. Yeah.
if people are migrating, they don't have that going on either.
Right. You don't have the continuation.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah. Mm.
it explains a lot about why things happen the way they did for Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, and then like I know we had one year in New York where we were on the same team,
Yes.
our Caribbean team, and we went all the way to the finals in the NEFA league. That was a good experience, certainly for. I don't know if you had ever played on artificial turf before you went there.
That's first time. Yes.
Exactly, right. Same thing for me. I'm like, well, this is
Yeah.
this is beautiful. Like the ball don't bounce.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
This
Yeah.
is just a
Yeah.
lovely experience here. Like if you
Yeah.
just imagine what it would have been like to have that thing. I know it was,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely a good experience having that one year to play up there and
Yeah.
um,
Well, I mean, obviously, once when I came up to New York, I mean, I still was very passionate about the game, so I tried to continue. But as you know, Jeremy,
uh,
when coming to the USA, it's totally different life, right? And my focus at the time, obviously, hadn't spent most of my youth in Guyana sports. I felt, hey, coming up to New York was my opportunity here to start thinking about, personal development, and obviously, so my focus really shifted to, basically family life, right? Shortly after coming up, got married and started getting kids and so on. Uh, and then obviously focused on my career, in terms of professional career.
right,
So
yeah.
hockey was just a way of, me keeping fit, if you will, at that time. I wasn't planning on making a national team or,
Oh no,
going
yeah,
back
at
and
that point, like that was over at that time for sure.
yeah.
So like your kids, what do your kids know about your hockey life?
Oh, well, I mean, I try to share with them, I mean, I got, some team pictures and we also have a discussion about what it was like,
Mhm.
so they know a fair amount.
Okay,
But,
all right.
clearly I know that in preparing for this, they're interested in seeing what you're going to put out on this,
Yeah,
because
so check Friday.
I've not gotten into the level of detail that that I have with you, or in terms of the
Good.
history of hockey in Guyana.
Yeah, it's important stuff. I mean, people.
Yeah,
That's another. I think the continuity, not just in terms of what people can contribute, but for younger people to know what
yeah,
it's like and to hear the stories of people like you and what you
mm-hmm.
do and like what you accomplished and did. The Cuba thing is a big thing. There's so much
Yeah,
about it, right? How much effort you put into it. Just having a dedicated national hockey coach, like
yeah,
full-time job, right? That
mm-hmm.
kind of stuff is important, and I think we miss that now, but just the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge that it happened before,
Yeah,
you know, is something I think people should know about. And hopefully, like after this,
mm-hmm.
I know how many people watch these interviews. I do maybe five people, at least five people know about it. So
Sure,
it's a
yeah,
good
mm-hmm.
thing,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. So I don't know, it's like at seven. This free Zoom is done in 30 minutes. So
Okay.
anything else you want to share with us about like your life, any stories?
Mm-hmm.
If you remember any stories about Chris that could embarrass him a little bit,
Well, I mean, I can tell you, I have a lot of respect for Chris. I mean,
yeah,
back then, he was basically, he was my what I call my hockey dad, really, because I mean, I can remember that I used to, I used to spend a lot of time with him. I can tell you that in my first trip to Jamaica, it was in '73, I was roommates with Chris and with Skip. We obviously were three in a room at the time, and so they were my roommates. And so it was me being, in a room, obviously learning hockey basically with, Chris and Skip. And so there were some very, I mean, pleasant memories, very memorable moments. And I owe a lot of what I did, what I knew for hockey, to Chris and Skip. I remember going into Skip's office and, having meetings with the hockey and they basically telling me what I need to do. So there was already pleasant memories. I mean, so there are a lot of fun memories. One of the things that I regret since coming to the US is that I have not kept, in touch with people there as I would have liked. I mean,
right.
obviously, Chris being one of those. I know Skip has passed on, and I was able to see him. I think you were there, we were back in Florida, a
Yeah,
couple of
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
So
It's
that
not
was a good,
60th. Yeah,
yeah, that was a good occasion. But
right.
that's one of the things I really missed about, youth and growing up in Guyana and hockey.
Yeah,
I mean, to me,
definitely.
those were very memorable days, memorable years, and certainly something I would always think about or remember.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that as I'm doing this, I didn't really realize how it would be, but like people I'm talking to, like, oh, you got this person number, and I'm, putting people in touch with one another, and
Yeah,
they really are, it's really a good thing to like get people back in touch with each other.
sure. Hmm.
So, and definitely it's a plus for me. Like, obviously, I'm growing up at a certain. I'm seeing these pictures of people, and the people like obviously watching hockey. I'm like, yo, that's who I want to be at some point in your life, right? So it's
Hmm.
definitely a
Hmm.
great experience for me to be doing this, and I'm great. I'm very thankful for you to participating and sharing your
Sure.
story. Hopefully, a lot of people get something out of it. And
Hmm.
thanks again. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
One final comment, Jeremy. I know that you obviously, in addition to doing this, that you're still involved in some level with hockey in Guyana. I know you guys were raising funds for the Astro Tour.
Yeah, so there's a
Don't
lot
know
of stuff.
exactly where you are with that, but if there's opportunity here where you feel I can help, I'm certainly willing to. I'm not retired, by the way, so
Oh,
I've
nice.
got,
Congratulations.
I got time on
Yes.
my hand. But if you need help or guidance or something you feel I can help with, certainly don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely, we'll do. We got all the contact numbers now. So yeah, definitely.
Sure.
At some point, we'll have. There's got to be something we could do that brings people together again. Maybe just that
Yeah.
is enough, to see. All right. Well, thanks a lot, George.
All right.
Appreciate the interest, and I'll let you know when this goes public.
All right. Thanks,
Take
Jeremy.
care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye bye.